Welcome to LOA Today. I'm Walt Thiessen. Today is Wednesday, January the 23rd, 2019. It's 8 a.m. in New York and 5 a.m. in Los Angeles, 1 p.m. in London, and Sydney, Australia is at 12 midnight. Wherever you are in the world, thank you for tuning in to another episode of LOA Today, your daily dose of happy. And our regular listeners will recognize that we have been reading from a book that was recommended to me by Linda Armstrong called Into the Magic Shop by James Doty, MD. He is a neurologist who has a fascinating LOA-type story that he tells in the book. We're not reading the entire book. We're just reading the one section of the book where he learns all this stuff as a 12-year-old from a woman named Ruth while he was living in Lancaster, California, in dire poverty and under miserable family circumstances. But he's been learning all this cool stuff, and he is now been taught by her all of the 4 steps that she teaches for manifesting what you want to attract into your life, and he is about to start giving it a try, and this is where this part of the story comes to a conclusion. So I have no doubt we're going to be able to get through that today. We'll probably have extra time at the end. It will also be an opportunity to do some Q&A for anyone who wants to bring up a question for us to discuss. Anyone who wants to come onto the platform at that point will be welcome to come up as well. So we'll just kind of wing it to see what happens. But I do know it's going to be fun to finish this. We may actually get a little bit further into the book too after this main section ends, just because it gives us a nice flavor of what happened to him after this initial experience and what happened after he grew up and so forth. So we'll touch on that a little bit too. So before we get started, I'm going to take a look at the group. The post in the LOA Today page and just see if there's any particular messages there. This is always a little bit slow because once I get podcasting, all the systems slow down. But just give me a moment here, and we'll connect in and see who's saying hello and who's saying what and so forth. I see a number of people hooked in. Nasha saying hello. Suraj is there till chapter 5. All right, that's good. Dee Dee, yeah, okay. So people are definitely hooked in here. I think we are ready to go. So let's see. For those of you who actually have managed to find a copy of the book, we're on the chapter 5 entitled 3 Wishes. We're partway through that one. We're actually on pages 118 and 119. And at this point in the story, Jim has just let Ruth know that he wants to be a doctor and that he's wanted to be a doctor for some time. So let's see. Where do we pick that up? He says, oh, yes. I couldn't imagine going to college or becoming a doctor. It seemed impossible, as far-fetched as my walking on the moon one day. But he, the doctor who came to his school, didn't seem to be joking. He looked at me directly in the eye and said, I can tell that you care, and I can tell that you would be a really good doctor, so don't count yourself short. And he smiled at me again as he turned and left the room. Don't count yourself short. That repeated in my head. I wasn't sure what that meant. I didn't count myself short. It was more like I hadn't thought there was anything to count at all. But in that moment, with no one in my family having ever gone to college, I decided this was exactly what I was going to do, become a doctor. I immediately imagined being called over the loudspeaker in the hospital like I had seen so many times watching Ben Casey on TV. It's not lost on me now that he was a neurosurgeon. And I have to admit, I didn't realize that about the Ben Casey television show. He was a neurosurgeon. Coincidence? Who knows? But I will tell you, to this day, I can still hear with complete clarity and see him in my mind's eye and hear that loudspeaker. That's great. I told Ruth, yes, I want to be a doctor. And then I corrected myself. I know I'm going to be a doctor. I had no idea how to go about making that happen. I had never even dreamed of going to college, much less medical school. But at that moment, I knew it would happen. Ruth clapped her hands together as if I had just done some amazing feat. That's it, she said. That's exactly it. What's it? That knowing. You have to know you will be a doctor, and then you will have to picture it in your head as if you were already a doctor. See the world through your doctor's eyes. Well, I closed my eyes and tried. It was hard. I could just barely see myself as a doctor looking down at my white coat, but it was fuzzy. It's hard to see. That's why you have to relax your body and clear your mind of all thoughts first, said Ruth. She walked me through the first exercises again. Now that I have your attention, it's time to set your intention. My what? I opened my eyes. Your intention. If you relax your body, clear your mind, and open your heart, it's easy to set a clear intention. You intend to be a doctor. You were very clear on that. I closed my eyes again and thought, I intend to be a doctor. I clearly intend to be a doctor. I am intending to be a doctor, clearly. I wasn't sure which one was better, so I thought them all. Now, Jim, imagine in your head you are looking through a window. The window is all fogged up, like the inside of a car when it's cold outside. Think of your intention as the defrost setting. Set your intention over and over again so that the window gets clearer and clearer, less and less foggy. On the other side of that window is you as a doctor. The more clearly you can see the image through the window, the more likely the image will come to pass in real life. I tried over and over again, and eventually I could see myself in a white coat through the window in my head. Keep at it, said Ruth, day after day, week after week, month after month, year after year. Whatever you can see clearly through that window in your mind will become real. And the more you can imagine you already have what's in that window, or you already are what's in that window, the quicker it will happen. It's really real? I asked Ruth. You promise this magic really works? I promise, said Ruth. I have never lied to you, Jim, and I'm not going to start now. But it takes work, and some things will take longer to happen than others. And sometimes it won't happen exactly the way you expect. But I promise you, everything you put on your list, everything you feel in your heart, everything you think about and imagine with your mind, if you truly believe, if you work very hard, will happen. You have to see it, and then you have to go after it. You can't just wait in your room. You actually have to go get good grades and go to medical school and learn how to be a doctor. But in some mysterious way, you will also be drawing it to you, and you will become what you imagine. If you use your mind and your heart, it will happen. You have my word. I went home that night and decided I better write down everything Ruth had told me this summer so I didn't forget. So I took out my notebook from my box of special things. I turned to a blank page and wrote Ruth's Magic across the top. I turned the page and wrote down everything I knew about relaxing my body, calming my mind, opening my heart, and setting my intention. I wrote down everything I could remember Ruth saying, even if I had no idea what it meant. I made notes in the margins and on the sides. I didn't want to forget anything. I copied my list of 10 things I wanted into the notebook. I read the first thing on the list. Don't get evicted. I read over everything Ruth had said about this last trick. She told me to think of anything I wanted, repeat my intention over and over to myself, and then create the clear picture in my mind. I wasn't supposed to think about what I didn't want. I didn't know how to imagine not being evicted. We had been evicted before. The police had come and given my mom the eviction notice, followed by people hired by the landlord to throw our things on the street. I didn't want to imagine this over and over again, and how do you imagine it not happening when you see it happening in your head? All our neighbors and my friends watching us get thrown out, no place to go, being taken to a homeless shelter and all of our belongings taken away to the garbage dump. I didn't want to relive it even one time in my mind. It was too painful. I thought about what Ruth said and decided to imagine the opposite. Every day, for the rest of the week, whenever I wasn't with Ruth, I spent hours creating a vision of my family being in our home. I saw us paying the rent. I saw us happy. I cleared away the foggy window with my mind, and at times I found myself still imagining the sheriff knocking on the door. It was a horrible knock. Loud and harsh and impossible to ignore, I knew what that knock meant. I also knew that the first of the month was approaching quickly. Ruth would leave, and I would end up without a home. Both images did battle in my mind, but every day I cleared the foggy window a little more and saw my mom paying the rent and us staying in our apartment. In my head, I kept saying over and over, the rent will be paid. We will not be evicted. Ruth and I practiced every day that week, up until our very last time together. She would talk me through visualizing myself as a doctor. and I would go home and practice visualizing the rent getting paid. My dad had said he was expecting some money to come in for a job he had done a long time ago, but I didn't believe him. I had heard those stories before. Eviction was looming, but I fought against it with the only power I had, Ruth's magic. I said goodbye to Ruth on a Saturday morning, and she hugged me for a long time. "I'm proud of you, Jim." "Thanks, Ruth," I said. "Thanks for everything you taught me." Saying goodbye was awkward. It seemed like it should have been a bigger deal than it was. Neil had been with a customer and had just sort of waved me off. Ruth was talking about waiting at the store until Neil could close up and take her to the airport, and then that was it. I got on my bike and headed home. I was in my room when I heard the knock on the front door. It startled me. I had been thinking about Ruth leaving. Another knock. It sounded angry and insistent. My stomach turned over and I could feel my heart start beating fast in my chest. I felt stuck to the floor. The knock started up again. I knew my mom was in bed and my dad and brother weren't home. I had to answer that knocking. There was no one else. I looked through the kitchen window, expecting to see the deputy sheriff's patrol car in front and the deputy at the door. Instead, there was a man in a suit. So I opened the door, and he looked at me, then asked for my father. "He's not here," I said. "Please tell your father that I am sorry I couldn't pay him before. Please give him this envelope, and please thank him for his patience." He handed me the envelope and walked away. I shut the front door and looked down at the envelope in my hand. It had a name and address written on the front of it. I turned it over. It wasn't sealed, so I lifted the envelope flap. I could see money inside. Lots and lots of money. I ran into the bedroom and gave it to my mother. She opened the envelope and slowly counted the money. There was enough money to not only pay the rent for the next 3 months, but also to pay some bills and buy food. I couldn't believe it. The magic had worked. It really worked. "I have to go," I yelled at my mom. I got on my bike and rode as fast as I could back to the magic shop. Ruth was just walking out the door with Neil. "Ruth! Ruth!" I screamed. She and Neil both stopped on the sidewalk. "I'm glad you came back," said Neil. "I meant to give you this earlier." He handed me a bag from the store. "You can still come by even without my mom here, any time." I said thanks, and he walked over to the car to wait for Ruth. I looked into her eyes. "It really works," I said. I had tears in my eyes. "The magic! It's real!" She put her arms around me and hugged me while I sat on my bike. "I know, Jim, I know." She stepped away and started toward the car, but then turned back. "You understand it now, don't you? The power you have inside you? You were ready to learn, and I was privileged to teach you. Each of us has that power inside. We each just need to learn how to use it. But remember, the magic I have taught you is powerful. Powerful for good, but in the hands of someone who isn't ready, it can also hurt and cause pain. And also remember, Jim, it is your thoughts that create reality. Others can create your reality only if you don't create it yourself." I watched her drive off, and I thought I understood what she was saying in those last moments we had together. But I didn't understand it enough, not nearly enough. There would come a time later in my life when I truly understood, but before that happened, I had to experience what Ruth had meant about such power in the hands of someone who wasn't ready. I was that someone. I looked into the bag Neil had given me. There was a plastic thumb tip and a few different decks of marked cards. I thought about Neil for a moment. I closed the bag up. I really liked his magic, but it didn't compare to the magic Ruth taught me. I had something better, something way more powerful. I was going to get what I wanted. And one thing I knew I didn't want was to be poor or to be looked down upon by people who thought they were better than me because they had money and lived in nice houses and drove nice cars and had good jobs. I was going to have everything. No one was ever going to look down on me. I was going to be a doctor, someone whom everyone looked up to. I was going to have $1 million. I would be powerful, successful, and I knew how to do it. Ruth had taught me. This magic was greater than anything I had ever imagined, and all along it was sitting right there inside me. I just didn't know it. I would train my mind, I would practice, I would work harder, do more, whatever was necessary. I knew I had it in me. We weren't evicted. It was all the proof I needed. Ruth's magic was real, and it was powerful, and I crossed that off my list, and I knew I would cross the rest of it off too. I hated Lancaster. Certainly my family situation contributed a great deal to how I felt about the place. But If it weren't for Lancaster, I wouldn't have learned the magic that would allow me to accomplish extraordinary things. I am thankful that I was there at that time in that place to meet the right person, the person who changed my brain with her magic. My reality before Ruth was that I felt lost, and that life was an unfair place where some were lucky and others were not. I didn't see any real possibility that I could become someone important or escape the small, miserable world that my parents lived in. But after Ruth, I saw the world differently. I saw myself differently. I believed in a world of unlimited possibilities. I could create anything I wanted, and this gave me a sense of power and a sense of purpose. Ultimately, we all have the ability to learn the same magic. I had tapped into the powers of my mind, and I was ready to use that power and not let anyone or anything stop me. So that's the conclusion of the main story of the book. There is a follow-up section, and I wanted to skip to the part where he describes what happens to him. Let's see. He says, "My school years passed by in a blur." High school years, actually. In some areas I did very well, but in others I just passed. I didn't yet have a clear image of what I needed to do to go to college or medical school. I also didn't understand how to ask for help or guidance. Only later did I realize that many people will help if they are just asked, but at that time I still felt I was alone and didn't know how to ask or even what to ask. As a child, not having mentors or people to turn to for advice or guidance has a huge impact on success in life. You can't do it if you don't know what it is. I had wanted to play sports in high school, and I had made the cut for the football, basketball, and baseball teams as a freshman. But I soon found out that school sports required both money and parental involvement, and I had neither on a consistent basis. It's hard to be a member of a team when you can't get a ride to practice, or you're unable to show up for a game because you have to stay home and babysit your mother, or have to go to a bar on a Friday night and find your father. I liked the feeling of belonging I experienced when on a team. Dressed in our uniforms, we were all the same, and we shared a common purpose. I never lettered in a sport in high school, although I wanted to desperately, so during my junior year, I took out my list of 10 things and added this to it: letter in a sport in college and get the jacket. Knowing I had my list tucked away helped me take life's disappointments and seeming unfairness in stride, and relaxing my body and calming my mind every evening eased my anxiety about both school and home. I was living for the future that existed in my mind, and it was a far more enjoyable place to live than our small, dingy apartment that smelled like mold and cigarette smoke. Unless I was practicing Ruth's magic or sleeping, I tried not to be at home. It was this desire to be at home as little as possible that made me apply to law enforcement exploring. In order to be a law enforcement explorer scout, you had to be over the age of 15, have at least a 2.0 GPA in high school, and be of good moral character. Every Saturday for 12 weeks, we went by bus to the Sheriff's Academy in Los Angeles and learned about law enforcement. For 8 hours, we studied community policing, criminal procedures, self-defense, and gun safety, and were drilled in physical fitness. All the deputy explorers wore the same khaki shirts and dark green pants. It wasn't exactly like being on a sports team, but I still got to wear a uniform and be a part of something bigger than myself. It was also nice to have somewhere to go on Saturdays. Once we had graduated from the program, we were official explorers and participated in different roles in our local sheriff's department, working side by side with a deputy. One day we might be on patrol, driving around the community and answering calls. Another time we might be in charge of crowd control at various events like parades, high school football games, and the annual 4th of July fireworks show. Or we could work in the jail alongside the officers who processed and booked anyone who was arrested. One Saturday night, my assignment was to work in the booking area at the sheriff's station in Lancaster. I was helping the jailer, and so was given a key. I hung the key proudly on the loop of my pants and waited for a massive takedown of some criminal masterminds. I imagined the jail filled with prisoners, with me outside the cell holding the key to their fate. I was powerful with that special key, but for most of the night there was no one around to see me in all my glory. I filed endless stacks of paper and reports, drank several Cokes from the vending machine, and basically sat around thinking this part of being in law enforcement was pretty boring. Just before my volunteer shift was over, I heard a patrol car pull up outside the booking area, and saw a patrolman walk in with a disheveled, handcuffed man. I couldn't see his face. He was obviously inebriated, and his speech was slurred. I felt my heart begin to race. This was it. I would soon be putting this criminal behind bars. The patrolman walked past me with the criminal. His shoulders were hunched over, and I still couldn't see his face, but he swayed and stumbled as he walked. I took out my key, knowing that after they fingerprinted and booked him, it would be time to lock him up. The criminal sat down at the desk, and that's when he lifted his head up and looked right at me. It was my father. He looked confused and angry and very, very drunk. I felt my stomach turn over. I quickly turned away from him and went back to the filing cabinet. I was so ashamed. I had written an entire essay for my Deputy Explorer application about my high moral character. Now what were they going to think about me? I had answered the questions about my family in a very vague way and had convinced myself that the deputies didn't know how poor I was, or that my father was an angry alcoholic who had been in jail many times. Part of the reason I had joined the Explorers was to prove just how different I was from my family. I opened the filing cabinet drawer and just stared at the rows of files inside. I wished I could use my special key to lock myself away from this place. Why did it always seem that no matter where I went, I couldn't escape who I was and where I was from? I felt a hand on my shoulder and looked up to see my supervising deputy standing next to me. "I'm sorry this happened," he said. I realized then that he must have known who my father was all along, and I could feel the heat flush across my face, so I kept my head down. I wasn't going to cry, but I wasn't sure what I was supposed to do. Was I really going to have to lock up my own father? I talked to the officer who brought him in. "We're not going to press charges. We'll let him sober up and give him a ride home." I nodded and murmured, "Thanks." I wanted to just disappear, but my supervisor was still standing there with his hand on my shoulder. "Jim," he said quietly. I looked up and into his eyes, expecting to see judgment or, even worse, pity, but I didn't see either. And in that moment, I remembered Ruth once telling me that just because something is broken doesn't mean everything is broken. I had always assumed that people judged me because of my father, because of my poverty, because of all the things I didn't have. But feeling that deputy's hand on my shoulder, seeing his eyes full of kindness, I realized that this was how I judged myself. I was poor. My father was an alcoholic. But I wasn't broken. Everything didn't have to be broken just because something was broken. I didn't have to be broken. "Yes, sir," I said to the deputy. "Do you want to leave or finish your shift out?" I'd like to finish it out." And the moment I said this, I knew it was true. My father had his path, and I had my path. The deputy looked at me again. "You know, Jim, my father was an alcoholic too. I know how you're feeling." I felt one last squeeze on my shoulder, and then the deputy turned and walked back out the door. And then he discusses that a little bit more, and there was another part of the story that I wanted to tell you about. Yes, okay, here we go. With my senior year already underway, I realized I had begun thinking about college, but I didn't know where to begin. My parents, while encouraging, just assumed that since I said I was going to college, it would happen somehow. My guidance counselor didn't even bring it up as an option. His meeting with me was short, informing me that he could give me information about technical schools if I wanted. I hadn't even known there was a guidance counselor until I got a notice that an appointment had been scheduled. While I had done well in some courses, overall my grades were mediocre. I had no real understanding of the necessity of good grades. For me, school had been a place I had to attend. And while I naturally, on one hand, had wanted to do well, I had no examples in regard to how to study or prepare to succeed in school. I had never had anyone in my family offer to help me with my homework or even tell me I had to do it. While my mother encouraged me to do well, I had no idea exactly what that entailed. And I didn't know anyone who had gone to college. I certainly didn't have any money to pay for college, and I had no idea how to apply. Still, I was absolutely, and perhaps naively, certain that the following year I was going away to college. It was shortly after my meeting with the guidance counselor that I tried to think of whom I could ask about how to apply to college. I was sitting in science class, waiting for a lecture to begin on the 3 laws of thermodynamics, when I noticed the pretty girl next to me filling out a bunch of forms. "What are you doing?" I asked. "What's all that?" I wondered if we had some sort of science test that I had missed somehow. She looked up from her paperwork. "I'm filling out my college application." I nodded as if I knew exactly what that entailed. "Where are you going?" I tilted my head sideways, but I couldn't see the name of any school on her forms. "UC Irvine," she said. "Really?" I wasn't sure exactly where Irvine was, but I knew it was south of Los Angeles somewhere. She laughed a little. Well, it's where I hope I'm going. The deadline is next Friday for all this, and I'm never going to get it done. She waved her hands over the papers. I said nothing as my mind shifted into overdrive. Deadlines? I had no idea there were application deadlines. I didn't know how any of this worked, and for a moment I felt doubt creep in. Would I even be able to apply to college in time? Where are you going? She asked. I thought for a second, considering how to reply. I'm going to UC Irvine, too. Now, I don't know why that came out of my mouth, but in that instant, that was my first choice school. I didn't really know anything about UC Irvine, but it was still more than I knew about any other college. I knew I needed to go to school to become a doctor, but no one had ever told me there were deadlines and stacks of forms to complete. She looked at me and said, I guess you've already filled out your application. And I stared at her for a moment and then lied. Well, no, I haven't received the application. I thought it was due next month. I've been waiting for it. And then, like a magician, she pulled out another set of forms and said, Hey, you're in luck. I have an extra application. Do you want it? Sure, thanks. I took it from her. I went home that night and tried to fill it out, and I realized I needed to get my transcripts, letters of recommendation, and my parents' tax return. For the next 3 days, I ran around getting everything. I filled out the forms to apply for financial aid and hoped it would be enough to pay for school. It was during this time that I really looked at my grades and test scores and the average grades and test scores of those who were accepted. I'd never get in. What had I been thinking? I realized all of Ruth's magic wasn't going to help here, plus I didn't have the money for the application fee. Well, I mailed the application anyway, and when I got home I sat on my bed and thought about Ruth. All the stuff she taught me. Could it really work? That night and every day thereafter, I sat on my bed and visualized receiving my acceptance letter. UC Irvine was the only college I applied to, and for a few months I heard nothing. In that time, we moved twice. When the thick letter from UC Irvine finally arrived, it had multiple forwarding notices on the outside. I took it up to my room and sat down on my bed. I slowly breathed in and breathed out, in and out. I knew Ruth had been right. I had applied myself to my practice every day for years, and I had applied to college. I stared at the large white envelope, and I saw myself in a white coat someday. This was the next step in the universe's conspiracy plot to make me a doctor, and as I ripped open the open, I had no doubt what it would say. Congratulations on your acceptance to the University of California at Irvine. My future had arrived. Yes, it had to be forwarded many times through the mail, traveling from one seedy apartment to the other, but my future had chased me down and finally found me. Thank you, Ruth, I murmured, and goodbye, Lancaster. I had been accepted. Amazingly, by graduation, I had significantly improved my academic performance and received some small scholarships and enough financial assistance to pay for tuition, room, and board. I was going to college. I was free. Pretty cool stuff. There's more stories about what happens in his life and more stuff about what he learns as a doctor and how the brain works and all this. And if you're interested, I thoroughly recommend that you pick up the book. This is Into the Magic Shop by Dr. James Doty. But I wanted to read that section of the book to you because that's the part when I read, I said, wow, this is really great. Talking about the law of attraction at a time where the term law of attraction hardly even existed. Most people had never even heard the term. Abraham Hicks was not due for another 20 years. And Neville Goddard never really used the term law of attraction himself directly. It was just not even heard of. But here is this woman, Ruth, coming out of nowhere from someplace in Ohio and teaching this young man, Jim, how to do the law of attraction when nobody knew about it. Pretty cool. So anyway, lots of people saying hello. Hello, everybody. Good morning. Good morning. People come in. Don't really have more of a topic at this point. I could certainly be addressing questions and so forth. Let's see. Well, actually, Suraj has a comment. I'm going to copy and paste your comment over here just because it's easier for me to see it in this window. So let's see. What does it say? Let's see. Nice story. I just wanted to inform you my company arranged my next presentation in front of 1,000 people now. Whoa! Way to go, Suraj. Oh, my goodness. Another presentation this time because of in front of 1,000 people. It says, because my last presentation was a huge success for the company. I think my manifestations, positive results increased my workload. Yeah, well, that's the thing. You got to be careful. But that's certainly the kind of success you want to have. He says, but I'm more excited now. Adrenaline is boosting now. Wow. and we'll ping you for any guidelines. Thank you. Well, congratulations to you, Siraj. That's a great result. Fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. And I want to remind you, too, when you first brought up the fact that you were going to make that presentation before, I think it was 500 people, and you got 600 odd after that. Remember what you felt like? Remember how nervous you were? You'd only spoken to groups of 30 or 40 before that, and you weren't really sure you could do it. It's kind of like what Jim went through in the book, isn't it? I mean, Jim was he was very doubtful about the whole thing from the moment that Ruth had mentioned to him that she could teach him this magic, but he was also really intrigued by it. And yet, over time, as he practiced and had a wonderful result of his family getting to stay in their apartment, the faith grew, the confidence grew. So I just want to remind you, remember that feeling, because that feeling is everything. That feeling it's like the adrenaline juice that you can kind of replay in your mind anytime that you need a little bit of a boost. So if a time comes when things aren't going right, or you're down or depressed or afraid or angry or whatever, just remember what you're feeling here. That's the most wonderful kind of memory to have, the kind where you're saying, wow, this stuff really works. I am so excited about the way this stuff really works. And that's how you can build your vibration back up again a lot more quickly than with some of the other processes, because this one is a process that is real to you, and that's what's so cool about it. So just wanted to give you that little heads up, but well done, really well done. Congratulations. And other people are voicing their congratulations too. That's really fabulous. It really is. So let's see. Don't really see any other questions there. Actually, I had a thought last night. Let me run it by you guys and see what you think. Because, my goal, my dream has been to build up our listenership here at the podcast. Not that we don't have a good listenership. We have the most wonderful listenership in the world. I just want to have more and more numbers of people who are listening and be able to help more and more people. And it occurred to me, a lot of the when you do reading on marketing and so forth, and I've studied marketing for most of my life, you learn that what you're trying to do is to reach people with the thing that they most want and that they most need. That's really what good marketing is all about. We have this kind of a false, well, it's not false, it's also kind of reinforced by our experience, but we have this notion in our minds that marketing and sales is about trying to force stuff down people's throats that they don't really want and con them into stuff and so forth. But that's not really what marketing is. Marketing is supplying what people really want, and doing that by first finding out what they really want, supplying it to them, and then getting paid for it. That's really what marketing is all about. Well, I know we have a good product here. I know we have something that people need and want. They want to feel good. They want to attract what they want to their lives. And I know that what we're doing here is paying off. It's helping people. And Siraj is a great example. He did the work himself, but he came here for some support, and he got the support, and it helped. So I want to keep multiplying that. And I recall that yesterday Nasha agreed to become our question gatherer. So as people ask questions during the podcast, she's going to start funneling them to me, and that way I'll know that the questions have been asked. But I also woke up this morning and asked myself, is there a way that we can extend that, so to speak, maybe multiply it? And a term came to my mind. The term was, this is a strange term, the term was Q squad, Q meaning question. And what I started envisioning, what was kind of coming to me was, wouldn't it be great if there were more people like Nasha, regular listeners, who are helping to funnel the questions to us? And the way that it happened was that while we're doing the podcast, there are also people who are kind of scanning the boards, like the Law of Attraction Changed My Life group board. People are always posting new things, right? They're always posting stuff, and a lot of the posts are just, your kind of generic, here's my thing I'm trying to manifest, here's my affirmation that I'm doing, that kind of thing. But people are often posting questions. I'm thinking, would it be kind of cool if we were all kind of gathering questions together that we could address here on the podcast, and call that the Q Squad, anybody who wanted to volunteer for that. So, I don't know, I'm just kind of throwing it out there to see, is that something people might be interested in participating in? Because, I really do believe the best way to have people get excited about what we do here is to be a part of it and to know that it's going on and so forth. What better way to do that than to invite people in who are asking their questions while it's going on, so they can be, drawn over and say, hey, here's a live session going on where we can actually answer your question. So I'm not quite sure exactly how to make that work precisely. I've given some thought to it this morning, but obviously I haven't had a whole lot of time to think about it. But I'm curious, what do you guys think of that? Does that sound like something that might be of interest? I mean, just give me your feedback on that. Nasha likes the idea. That's good. Siraj likes the idea. Okay, yeah, that sounds good. So yeah, I mean, let's just kind of let that stew for a little bit. We'll do Ruth and Jim's method of relaxing the body, relaxing the mind, opening the heart, and then placing the intention. So I'm actually going to be doing their method for a while, their particular approach, just to see how it differs and how the experience is different from, say, the Abraham approach or the Neville Goddard approach. But let's just sit with that for a bit, and I'll bring it up in future podcasts over the next couple days, and we'll just see what it turns into. So let's see, what else is? Oh, Dee Dee likes that too. Yeah, that's right, the Q Squad. I love that. I love the name. I don't know where that came from, but the Q Squad sounds good to me. So let's see. Anyone have any questions they want to address? Any topics they want to address? What's this? Podcast shots will have a hangover. Okay. Yes, Nasha. Yes, I have been answering questions on various posts, and that's part of what made me think about it, because it's great when we can help somebody when they post something. I was just thinking, what if we could take it to the next step? Bring them into the podcast here and have them be a part of the audience and so forth. Because I have noticed any time that I answer a question of somebody and mention that I'll talk about it on the podcast, I get a really positive response out of it. So, and that kind of makes sense, I mean, if you're dealing with something, if you're kind of stuck on a point or trying to understand how some aspect of how law of attraction or deliberate creation works, when someone comes along and says, well, hey, we're going to give a full discussion of it, that feels pretty good. It's like, oh, wow, my question really is going to be answered. It's not going to be little snippets of answers typed into a comment section. And I think people appreciate that. So, yeah, I think it's something to look forward to. Let's see. So we've got about 20 minutes left. Cindie, by the way, Cindie Chavez will be with us for the afternoon podcast. We'll be talking about Neville Goddard's book, Your Faith is Your Fortune. I think we're on chapter 5 or 6. I can't remember which one. Chapter 6, I think. Could be 5. Doesn't matter. We're going to do the next chapter that we're on. And that's going to be great. And we're hopeful she's going to be able to come back next week for all 3 of her podcast slots. It really comes down to what goes on with this thing that she's been dealing with in her personal life. But we're both hopeful that she's going to be able to come back. So I'm really looking forward to that. And Dee Dee, you actually mentioned that you wanted to come on when we were talking about Neville, and so I want to just formally invite you. Feel free to join us on the platform when we're doing any of those Neville shows, and we'll be glad to include you in the conversation. In fact, that's true for anybody. Every time that we post, we create a post in order to put the video up so that people can see the live stream as we're recording the podcast. Every time we put it up, we put up links to the Blue Jeans platform, as well as subscriber links for iPhone users and Android users. And so if you click on that link, it'll actually walk you through the process of getting you onto the podcast platform, as Dee Dee found out. Dee Dee figured out the hard way to get there, but I want people to have the easy way to get there. So, yeah. And I also I want to make sure I get the regular announcements in, too, because I've been a little bit lax in that department lately. For those who are not yet subscribers, if you're tuned in and you're listening to the live stream, or even if you're listening to the recording, in the description for the post, you'll find, like I said, you'll find the links for Android users and the link for iPhone and iPad and iPod users. Just click the right one for your kind of device, and it will just walk you through all the steps of becoming a subscriber. And, of course, once you're a subscriber, you get all of the episodes that we create, all 11 every single week. That's 50 episodes a month that we're doing. You'll get them streaming right to your smartphone, and they're on demand to listen to whenever you need to get that extra dose of feeling good, that daily dose of happy, and then you become part of our community. And we also invite you too, if you if you're available during one of the times that we do the live streams, come join us on the live stream. We stream from the LOA Today page in Facebook. So all you really have to do is show up at that page, and when we go live, it'll just kind of show up there, and you'll see, oh, yeah, there's a live video, and there you are. You're listening to us. You're watching us. And feel free to comment, and feel free to join us on the platform. And we want to make this more and more of a group conversation. The more that we can do to do that, the happier I'll be with it. I can promise you that. Also, if you are listening regularly and sharing, we want to thank you for that. Those people who are our best listeners are the ones who are sharing the episodes regularly with people that they know, particularly people that they think might be receptive to it. We have had instances where people shared stuff with everybody on their list, and that didn't always go over well. So you want to be a little bit selective about who it is you're going to share with. But if you have some sense that the person might be interested, please do share, because that's how we get the word out. And in that kind of sharing, all kinds of wonderful things come out of it, both for the podcast as a whole and for us as individuals, all of us. So please do subscribe and share. And also feel free to send in your keep those cards and letters coming in, as Cindie likes to say. If you have questions and you can't listen to the live stream, that doesn't mean we can't include your questions and your comments in the conversation as we do these podcasts. And we have, on many occasions, done exactly that. Somebody sends us a message via the website, through the contact form, or something through Facebook or through Twitter, or send us a message via email. The email address that I receive emails on is walt@loatoday.net. So any way you want to contact us, send the stuff in, and we'll address it in detail. We've even had situations, like I remember one show that I did with Joel Elston, where we got a letter, I think it was an email, or maybe it was a contact form. It was a contact form from one of our listeners, and we spent the entire show talking about it because it was such an interesting topic. So who knows? The question that you raised could end up being covered in great, infinite detail, and you can have more of an answer than you possibly dreamed you could get. So feel free. Please do call in or send in or whatever, and let us know what your questions are, even if you're just listening to the recording, which is the way most people listen, by the way. Most people don't hear the live stream. Most hear the recording. So we encourage you. Please do keep sending those cards and letters in. And let's see. Lots of... I have a question. Nasha says, I have a question. How do we control our anger? That's a good question. She says, if I'm angry, for instance, what should I do to deal with it? Yeah. Isn't that a big part of what we're up against? I mean, we know, those of us who have been studying this topic for quite some time, we realize that when we're in that angry vibration, when we're feeling really down and kind of pissed off, it's not the vibration to be in to attract what we want to attract in our lives. And that's what's behind Nasha's question. It's an excellent question. I think there are a lot of ways you can approach that, a lot of ways you can address how do you get into a better feeling place, how do you deal with the anger itself, what if it's recurring, how do you deal with the recurring aspect of it. And I would also refer people to some of the past episodes that we've done, because we did cover that to some degree in those past episodes. But I will address the anger issue the way I look at it, the way I think about it. Whenever I'm really angry, I ask myself one very important question: why am I so angry? Which is not the way we normally think about it. Normally we think about, well, who am I angry at? Or what have they done to make me angry? Or what's the situation that has happened that makes me angry? But that's not actually my first question, which is, and I don't even know why I started doing it this way, but I did. I pretty early started asking myself, why am I so angry? Why am I so angry? That's the way I phrase it. Why am I so angry? And the purpose behind that question is to remind myself, it doesn't matter what it is that happened. The degree of anger that I'm feeling is entirely in my own control. And by phrasing it that way, it's like my first step that I take to take the sting out of it, to take the pain out of it. Because, excuse me, man, I'm trying to do two things at once. When I take the sting out of it, it is no longer hard to deal with. And that's my first goal, is to try to take the sting out so that I can look at it without feeling overwhelmed by it. Because if I don't do that, usually in my past, what I would tend to do is try to stuff it away. Because it was, when you're that angry, or if you're in pain, the first thing you want to do is just get rid of it, right? Well, that's actually not the best thing to do, as we all know. It's actually better to deal with the anger, to deal with the source of it. So that's why I start with, why am I so angry? If I start with that question, that tones it down enough that I can start handling it. I can start playing with it and not stuff it away. Once I start playing with it, then it's easier to ask questions like, well, who am I angry at? And, is there another way to look at it? One of the cliches here in America that is kind of vaguely attributed to Native American Indian tribes, so-called, is that you don't want to judge somebody until you've walked a mile in their moccasins. I don't even know which tribe that originated in, but it's a fairly common cliche here. And I like the idea of it, because if you walk a mile in someone else's moccasins, what you're really doing is you are trying to imagine how they think and feel about something. And if I can bring myself to do that about the person I'm angry at, because usually it's a person I'm angry at. Sometimes it's circumstances, but usually it's a person. And if I can think about the person I'm angry at and ask myself, well, what's it like from their perspective? That is like one of the first things that I can do after I've asked myself why I'm so angry. It's one of the first things I can do to just start calming it down. The overall process is to try to just keep playing with it and looking at it and exploring it and prodding it being the anger, from as many different angles as I can. And the more that I do that, the less power it has, the more it tends to shrink, the more the emotion of it tends to lessen, until finally, if I keep at it and keep at it and keep at it, it goes away. As it's getting smaller and smaller, that's when I use the Abraham Hicks process of pivoting. Pivoting is where you are heavily focused on something that's really negative, something that's really, really bugging you, and you can't seem to get away from it. Well, anger can be like that. But if you can reduce the sting of it and then focus on it with the idea of asking, well, what can I pivot to from there? And pivoting is about changing your focus away from that negative thing you've got yourself so heavily focused on, and shifting over to what's a different way of looking at the same situation. Not necessarily looking at the opposite or saying, well, I really love that thing, because you don't really love that. And that doesn't actually help you to just do a pure opposite switch, like, well, this thing that I hate so much that I'm so angry at, I'm actually in love with. No, don't do that. But you can usually find something about the situation that you weren't looking at. Like, for instance, let's say I am angry because my wife burned the dinner. Well, she never does that, but this is hypothetical. My wife is a wonderful cook. But anyway, let's say she burns the dinner, and I'm really, really angry about that. Okay? Well, first thing is, why am I so angry at it? It's only food, for goodness sake. It's not like we can't, make another meal. It's not like we can't, create another meal if we have to. It's not a big a deal. So why am I so angry at it? That helps calm it down. And then I ask myself, well, what's it like from her perspective? Well, maybe she has spent her day running around dealing with all this stuff, and she's feeling overwhelmed. And as I think about it, I say, well, yeah, I mean, she's been doing all this stuff, and now she's got to make the dinner. She must be feeling exhausted. Well, no wonder the dinner got burned. Her mind wasn't focused the way she would normally focus. And just by changing it that way, now all of a sudden, I've taken some more of the sting out of it. But I haven't done the pivot yet. The pivot is where I go through those steps, and then I say, well, instead of complaining about the burnt dinner, I could offer to make a different dinner for us. And now I'm thinking about it a little bit differently. Or I could offer to take her out to dinner. Again, thinking about it a little bit differently. Or I could just be grateful for the fact that all the other dinners this week have been really good. Again, just shifting the way I'm looking at it. The pivot is about taking what you have been so focused on and shifting to another part of the conversation. A part that doesn't have the anger or the fear or the frustration attached to it. So that's kind of my long-winded way of describing it, but I take away the sting by asking myself what I'm so angry about. I take away some more of the sting by looking at the person who I'm angry at and asking myself, well, are there some extenuating circumstances that might explain why they did X that I'm so angry about? And then after I've done those two steps, then I ask myself, what can I do or look at as an alternative to what happened so that I don't have to keep being focused on I'm so angry about X having happened. So that's my approach. What do you think? Does that help you? Let's see. Oh, Shelley had her own commentary about being angry. Let me copy and paste hers into my little text window here so I can see it a little bit easier. Right. Yeah, she says, when I get angry, I try to see what is frustrating me. I do my best to reflect instead of lashing out, and that helps me diffuse it for me. Usually I'm just mad about my own lack or fear. Boy, is that the truth, Shelley. Isn't that what it always is? Whenever we're really angry about something, what we're really all upset about is our own lack in some way. It can be a lack of compassion. It can be lack of understanding. It could be lack of attention to what it is that we really wanted to focus on, and we allowed ourselves to be distracted over to this other thing. There are lots of ways that there can be a lack involved. But there is usually a lack or a fear involved. That's really true. That's a great point, Shelley. So, yeah, I would definitely keep that part in mind. And Nasha says, Shelley says, in that situation, always take her out to dinner. Yes, right. She loves being taken out to dinner. That one for a bad dinner situation, that's always a winner with Louise. I know exactly what you mean. Nasha says, thank you. That's really helpful. Dee Dee likes the answer. That's good. Okay. And Suraj is saying thank you. He's got to go on to do some other stuff. Have a good day, Suraj. Oh, Dee Dee had a longer thing. Let me see if I've got this. I had a plan to start some kind of business long before I heard about LOA Today and have been involved for months in an internet marketing training. So were it not for that, I'd help with the Q Squad, but Nasha is perfect for that, so happy that idea came to you. Okay, yeah. Yeah, you have to tell us some time about your internet marketing training, Dee Dee. There's probably some stuff in there that we could all benefit from, so feel free to come onto the platform sometime. You actually did that yesterday, and it was great. We loved having you on when Alex and I were doing it. It was great having you come on, so feel free to do it again. Let's see, what else we have going here? I don't really see any other questions. Suraj says, you attract what you are. What your vibrational frequency is tells a lot, and that's really it, isn't it? That vibrational frequency. I think I'll conclude talking about that because it was one of the concepts that I found to be most confusing early on when I was first studying the law of attraction and how it works. And I actually needed to have the Abraham decoder ring in that particular instance, because Abraham is the one that talks about vibration the most. And what vibration ultimately means to me is how you feel. Are you feeling happy? If you're feeling happy, if you're feeling positive, passionate, joyful, that's high vibration. If you're feeling angry or fearful or depressed or frustrated, that's low vibration. And if just by understanding it that way, the whole concept of vibration becomes so much simpler to me. But I think it's important to point that out because, especially when we get somebody listening to one of these podcasts who is relatively new to the whole topic, that vibration thing can be really confusing. So I try to make it a point to do the translation almost any time that we use the word vibration, just because it's so much easier to think about it in terms of how do I feel? Do I feel good? Do I not feel good? If I feel good, I'm high vibration. If I don't feel good, I'm low vibration. And once I understand it that way, then whenever I hear Abraham saying things like, well, when you're high vibration, that's when you're going to be able to attract better, then I realize, oh, all I got to do is I got to feel better. If I feel better, then I can attract better. If I don't feel good, then I'm not going to attract very well at all, or anything I do attract is going to be stuff that I won't like, which makes a lot of sense, I think. Clearly, if you're feeling good, you're going to just have more good stuff going on. It's going to happen. I think probably the hardest part of the whole concept is recognizing that you have to feel good first, because that kind of goes against what our societies teach us. Our societies teach us that, well, when good things happen, then you'll feel good. And when bad things happen, then you'll feel bad. That the order is the thing happens and then you feel it. And what we're learning is that we actually have to reverse that. We have to have the feeling first, and then we have the experience after that. So it kind of goes against the grain in a sense. But it's a good kind of against the grain. It's a good thing to learn. And in the process of learning it, we find that we have a lot of ancillary benefits that come out of it, such as, like Shelley was talking about, how when something happens, you kind of examine what's going on, and you take the moment to ask yourself, well, why is it I'm so angry, or what is it that's got me so jacked up about this thing? And just by playing with it, you're able to set a new reaction, a reaction that is not so much a reaction as it is a pre-action. So, okay, this thing is going on, but I'm not going to get upset about it because I have set a new pre-action. My pre-action is I'm going to feel okay about it, or I'm going to look at it differently, or I'm going to change my perspective in some way so that I'm not wrapped up in being angry or fearful about it. And when we learn that trick, that is a big trick. When we learn that trick, that's when stuff starts to happen in a really wonderful way. And that's what's so cool about our journey, because it happens in ways that we don't expect, and the that happens is itself unexpected. All kinds of amazing things happen. They call them synchronicities. Things that are connected, but we can't really necessarily see how they're connected. It's just this thing happens here and it leads to that over there, and we say, whoa, how did that happen? But it happens all the time, those synchronicities. What was that Nasha said? Exactly. That's why I blocked a lot of people, but had to unblock some because I needed to gather the questions for Walt. All right, Nasha. Yeah. Well, that's the nice thing about blocking, isn't it? You get to be selective about it. You get to decide who you're going to block and who you're going to unblock. And that in and of itself is power. So I like that. That's a good observation. Shelley says, when you choose your tribe, you don't interact with people like that. Yeah, exactly right. We get to choose, don't we? Especially in the social media age. With social media, we can choose all we want to, and we can be as selective as we want to. We can choose who to friend and who to unfriend, and who to follow and who to unfollow, and we can change our mind whenever we need to and whenever we want to. It's quite empowering to have that. So, yeah, I agree with you. We get to choose our tribe. Oh, Nasha earlier mentioned it was more about dealing with psychos and frauds. Yeah, I try to stop thinking about psychos and frauds, to be honest, Nasha, because when I think about the topic, I get more of them. So I say, I'm not going to think about that too much. I'm actually going to think that most of the people in my life are wonderful, are just terrific people, and really appreciate them. I appreciate all of our listeners for that reason. Partly, I appreciate them, and partly because they're worthy of appreciation. We have terrific listeners, and partly because it's just good policy to do so. For me, it's good for me to do that because I tend to get more people listening who are wonderful listeners. So I think it's important to just not worry about the frauds. I've gotten frauds. I had a couple in the last couple of days. Interesting thing. I'll just tell this as one last quick final story. I had somebody who friended me on Facebook. I had no idea who this person was. And she starts doing a conversation with me. And I could tell that it was one of those conversations where you can see they're leading up to something where they're going to try to pull the wool over your eyes. And in the midst of it, all of a sudden, all of the conversation notes turned into this person needs to verify their account. In other words, Facebook had found them and had knocked them offline so they couldn't interact anymore. And I thought, how cool is that? I didn't get all upset about this possible fraud. I didn't get all upset about this psycho. I was just doing everything I could to take my mind off it, and Facebook took them away just like that. So there's an example of how the magic works. Anyway, want to thank everyone for tuning in this afternoon. Once again, Cindie and I will be talking about Neville Goddard's book, Your Faith is Your Fortune, and we will continue our discussion there. And we hope you'll join us that time and every time here on LOA Today. Goodbye, everybody.